Dragon Ballers, if you're looking to buy Dragon Ball Super or One Piece sealed product, make sure to get 5% off using my link to Mystic TCG down in the description. You can also sell cards to them using their Facebook link, which is also down in the description. Yo, what's going on, One Piecers? Welcome back to another meta breakdown video. In today's video, we're going to go over the results and deck lists from the Miami Treasure Cup that took place over the weekend. First and foremost, huge shout out to PPG for one, making their data super timely and available and accessible, and two, just for hosting incredible events. This really is the best TO in all of Bandai games. I really can't say enough good things about them. PPG always does a great job. But anyways, we're going to get into that in today's video. If you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. If you guys want to see a 2-hour-long testing stream, go over to the live tab of this channel. I just recorded one last week where I was live for 2 hours. I'm going to try to live stream more often for One Piece and for Dragon Ball Super when the digital client comes out for that game. But yeah, gonna get more into live streaming, but check that out in the live tab. You guys can watch the re-recording of it basically, because I did stream it on YouTube and YouTube just automatically uploads that, which is pretty awesome. But anyways, we'll get into this right now. We will start with the total room breakdown. So out of about 500 players, we have 129 of them playing Green Kid. Green Kid takes up over 1/4 of this entire room. And we talked about this a lot last week with those treasure cups. This is the most consistent deck in the game. And honestly, it makes sense to play Kid in an inconsistent game like One Piece. And I say inconsistent because we play with the 50 card deck and the game doesn't have too much draw power, but Kid is able to search through most of its deck. It's got 2 1-drops that filter a great amount of cards, and that just leads to the deck being able to be piloted successfully by players who know what they're doing. Because if you put a consistent deck in a good pilot's hands, it's probably going to do better than a more powerful deck in a lesser pilot's hands. We talked about that last week, power versus consistency. In this game, it seems like consistency is definitely winning out. What's really interesting though is Red Zoro is then the next most popular deck in the room, and not a single Zoro goes on to top this event, which is pretty insane. I mean, for this to be the second most rep deck in the room and not have a single conversion in top 16, that kind of does speak volumes. You know, of course, like, the Zoro players could have had a bad day, but I do think Zoro pairs pretty poorly into Kid most of the time, so that might have been a big factor as to why that was. But besides that, it just seems like Luffy is actually taking the limelight in terms of the best red deck. We saw last week how much Ben Beckman, the vanilla 7-drop 9k, was able to just dominate a tournament. And that card just having insane stats, being able to deal with the 8-drop kit effectively among like Otama Jet Pistol, and just being able to apply pressure that you know, you can't really counter out of in this game because the number is just too high. You either have to block Ben Beckman or you have to have a counter in order to effectively an event counter, I mean, to effectively stop him, right? So that poses a lot of problems. But we do have Kaido being one of the more popular decks in this room as well, which is pretty unusual. Purple has not typically been one of the more popular decks. Like, there are a lot of diehard Kaido fans, don't get me wrong, but it's not one of the more popular decks because it is one of the more inconsistent ones. Like, you know, having Onigashima versus not having it is a huge difference. But yeah, that pretty much sums up the more popular decks in the room. We have a fair amount of Law and a fair amount of Dopey, and then we have more of the decks that we don't typically see in top cuts that are not as great. But anyways, let's go and look at the actual top 16 breakdown. All right, for this top 16, we have 9 Green Kid. 56% of this top 16 is consistent of Green Kid. Some people would call that a tier 0 meta. We have to see this for several weeks for me to go about saying that Kid is tier 0, but I do think it's the best deck. Maybe not by the biggest margin, but again, that consistency I think makes Kid the play for this particular format. It makes me think a lot about the future of One Piece, and when we get like more 1-drop searchers and maybe leaders that draw cards and stuff like that, you know, that's a possibility, and how much more consistent the game will be, how many more decks will open up, and how many more different forms of skill expression we'll see within the game. But still, I mean, this much Green Kid is insane. I gotta give a huge shout out, by the way, to Andrew Duvall, who takes first place at this event. That guy is a monster. If this is your first time hearing his name, he is the 2-time DBS national champion, as well as the Worlds champion from last year. He's going to play Worlds again this year for Dragon Ball Super, and he won the Miami Treasure Cup, and we are absolutely going to take a look at his list in a minute here. But besides that, we have a pretty even split after the overwhelming amount of Kid. We have 2 red Luffys, 2 red green Laws, 2 purple Kaidos, and 1 Doflamingo. So a pretty interesting mix here in terms of like playstyle differences. So Kid is like a tried and true mid-range deck. You can go pretty aggressive, but you can also play a pretty good long game with the 8-drop Kid and 7-drop Kid and whatnot. Then you have like red Luffy and your Law being a bit more of like your lowest to the ground aggro decks. Again, Luffy adopting like Ben Beckman and making that such a vital part of the deck. I'm not sure if these lists exactly do the same thing, but that list winning last week would lead me to believe that they did that. And we'll take a look at the top placing red Luffy list as well. But yeah, those are more of your low to the ground things with Rush and different red cards and stuff like that. And then Kaido and Dopey being a bit more on the control end. Kaido being a real hardcore control deck. Dopey probably a bit more mid-range, but still wants to stick those big boss monsters like the Mihawks and the Dopeys. So pretty cool playstyle difference. It's just nice in set 1 of One Piece that the game does feel rather balanced, which is a big difference from Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball set 1 was a lot of blue. And mixtures of blue, like blue red, blue green, stuff like that. But yeah, anyways, let's take a look at some of these deck lists, starting with first place. We are taking a look at Andrew Duvall's Kid list. So moving through here, we have a pretty consistent lineup of 1-drops. I really like 4 Bonnie and 3 Momo. I think that's a pretty adequate lineup, considering that Momo searches a bit less of your deck and can sometimes whiff. 3 Capone, I wouldn't play less than 4 because sometimes you got to block those Ben Beckmans and big attacks, but still, it worked out for him. 4 copies of Killer, 4 copies of Neko. Then we have our 2K lineup. We are only playing 8 2Ks. We're not playing any copies of Beppo here. 3 Raizo. I absolutely love this card. This might be my favorite card in the deck. Just the simple draw. And once you get this established with like him plus 8-drop Kid, you can do some pretty cool things to like just make sure your resources never ever go down. Like if you can set up an 8-drop Kid as well as a Raizo or like one of the 1-drop searchers, you can just use their effects every single turn, and they can never be attacked into. Your opponent have to have a hard removal for them in order to actually shut off your draw engine, which is cool. And then we have, for our bigger drops, we do have 4 copies of Law, 2 X-Drake. Now, I think most Kid lists kind of just balance between X-Drake and 3-drop Killer as to which one you want to play for the removal aspect. X-Drake is just better against blue decks because blue actually plays a lot of 4-drops. The leader ends up playing 4-drops in rest mode a lot of the time. But the 3-drop Killer has better synergy with Law because it can be played for free off that, as well as being able to kill things like Rush Zoro, for example. K body makes him a lot more threatening than Killer's 3K, so yeah, definitely don't mind that. 2 Basil, I love 3 Basil, man. That's just me. I think that card is cracked in the mirror. I think it's cracked in just about every single matchup. But I mean, you got to make sure you're monitoring the amount of uncounterable cards you're playing. 2 7-drops, I like this as well. I like this a lot because at the beginning of the meta, we saw that there were lists doing well with no 7-drops, and then but typically we've seen a lot of Kid lists playing 4 7-drops. So I also like meeting it right in the middle with 2 7-drops. That's what I'm playing in my current list. That's what I played on stream last week. I do like that quite a bit. Also interesting here is 2 Paradise Waterfall and 2 Punk Gibson. Normally we see Kid players choose one or the other based on preference, but Andrew chooses to go with both here, just looking for those situations where, Paradise Waterfall allows you to protect your board, and Punk Gibson allows you to interact with your opponent's board, whether you trigger it off life or you use the actual counter to tap like a 4-drop swinger or maybe a blocker, something along those lines. So again, big congratulations to him on taking the Treasure Cup. Let's look at the highest placing Law list. Pretty standard stuff with 4 Otama, 4 Chopper, 3 Capone, 4 Bonnie, 4 Nami. We are not playing a Wano engine in this build, which we've seen different Law builds, some adopting the Wano engine and some not opting to play it. Having the Momo is nice because it gives you more 1-drops, which I do think Law really likes to have, because the faster you can flood your board, the faster you're pulling off your leader's effect to cheat in your bigger character cards, and with more 1-drop searchers that just becomes a little bit easier. But we are actually playing 2 copies of the Film Pack Gordon. Now I gotta remind myself what this guy does. Activate main, you may return this character to the bottom of the deck, give one of your opponent's characters minus 3k power during this turn. So not such great synergy with the leader because this card removes itself from the board, which goes against what your leader wants to do, but it does combo very, very nicely with Jet Pistol. Jet Pistol killing anything that has 6,000 power or less. And then Gordon can minus 3k. So what card have we been talking about this entire video? Ben Beckman. This thing can get Ben Beckman off the board in conjunction with Jet Pistol, which I think is a pretty cool inclusion. Going through here, pretty standard stuff the rest of the way. Only 4 rushers with 2 Zoro and 2 Luffy. Sometimes I feel like that can be a pretty light number. But I mean, again, to this player's preference, this worked out. And this leaned into the 8-drop Kid. Again, some Lawless don't even end up playing the 8-drop Kid, and those builds are typically a bit more aggro. This one seemed to be a bit more mid-rangey. trying to defend that with Radical Beam. Now, Radical Beam I find to be a very interesting card in Law and red decks in general, because you only get the full value out of it if your leader is at 2 or less life, making this a 1 cost 4k counter. That's the best value. That's the life total you want to be at when playing this card. I do think it's tough for red decks to pull this off, because the name of the game against red decks oftentimes is going for their board and not their life. So you might leave red decks at like 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 life for a couple turns before you actually start hitting their life. But again, it kind of depends. Like, Law is already starting at 4 life, so only taking 2 hits, maybe in the early game, just 5k leader swings. Maybe you just take those, take the cards to hand, and once your Radical Beams are online and you're trying to defend your 8-drop Kid, that's probably just where the sweet spot of this deck probably lies. Then we're going to take a look at the highest placing Luffy list. So for some reason there's no Luffy leader in this thing, but anyways, it is a Luffy list, the highest placing one. We have our standard 1-drop lineup. We also have Bartolomeo, which I need to refresh myself on what he does. He's a 2-cost 2k blocker with a 1k counter, and then Don 2, this character gains 3000 power, making him a 5k. So I do wonder if this list was actually aiming to ever pull that off. I would kind of assume not, just because like this guy blocking for 5k doesn't even let him like survive neutral hits of 5k, so that probably wasn't too big of a deal, even though your leader can technically give him rested Dawn. But yeah, this is probably just for additional blockers, which makes a lot of sense, and having the 1k counter also makes sense. Then we have the 2k Gordon, the 2k Sanji. We are playing 12 2ks from the looks of things, which is a pretty solid lineup. But this list just leans heavily into the big guys. So of course we have our 8 rushers, our Zoros, and our 5-drop Luffys. We have 3 copies of Ben Beckman, the guy who asserted his dominance last week. This guy seems to be like a main staple going forward. And then we have the 4 copies of Manga Shanks. Now I'm really curious to know if this player actually had 4 Manga Shanks in their deck, and 4 copies of Alt Art Nami, and 4 copies of Alt Art Zoro. If so, this deck is like ridiculously expensive. So if you know who this player was, or if you are this player, let us know in the comments if you were actually playing this max rarity deck. That'd be super cool. But anyways, for the defensive lineup, we do have 3 copies of Radical Beam. Gave my thoughts on that in the Law profile, and we have 2 copies of Red Hawk. So this is one that I've seen a lot of the Luffy lists that lean into Ben Beckman playing like 3 to 4 copies of. And it's actually kind of insane because of the trigger from life. Like, you can just all out survive a turn you were not supposed to survive because Red Hawk ends up in your life, and that could literally change an entire game. So again, you're playing for like an RNG factor. That's not necessarily a great reason to justify playing more copies of this card in your deck, but with a 7-drop that Ben Beckman is, it does leave up 3 Dawn open, 2 of which can be used for Red Hawk, although it doesn't synergize too greatly with Shanks because he is a 9-drop and you won't have the Dawn available for Red Hawk, so you got to kind of pick and choose your battles there. But anyways, let's take a look at the highest placing Kaido list. So going with 2Ks, we have 12 of them. We have 3 Jack as our alternative ramper. We talked about this in Zuhair's deck profile from last week, where Jack is really nice for when you don't hit Onigashima, but you want to be able to swing at your opponent's board. Like against the red matchup, for example, they may play a Zoro, and having the Jack that ramped you on turn 2 will give you another body to swing into that Zoro, try and get it off the board. Pretty standard stuff for our mid-game cards, except for Kyoshiro. I don't quite remember what he does. It looks like he has an on-play effect. Maybe he's a ramper, but I can't quite remember exactly what he does. We have 2 copies of 6-drop King and 2 copies of 7-drop King, kind of splitting the difference there. You know, King obviously being better for like your Laws and your Reds, where you're trying to deal with the wide boards, and then the Kings being better against the 4-drops like the Blues, and also like the 3-drop Okikus in green, for example, which can be a bit of a nuisance for Kaido. And yes, like 7-drop King also deals with that, but not having the Dawn -2 just to kill an Okiku is definitely pretty appreciative. Then we have 2 copies of the 9-drop Kaido boss. We have 3 copies of the 10-drop. This does seem to be just a pretty ramp heavy build, playing 2 copies of Brachio Bomber as well as our Jacks. We're trying to ramp up as fast as possible, and we're playing a bit less of the other bombs, so this build probably wants to play a 10-drop just about every single game to restabilize, and then start playing the other bosses from there. Very interesting to see 4 copies of Thunder Bagua, though. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to leave up all that Dawn, especially for this many copies of the card. You might be stuck with like 2 or 3 in your hand at a point where you can't use it, but there is a trigger, of course, get yourself ramped, which is probably the main justification for playing 4 copies of it. And the final list I want to go over today is the highest placing blue Dopey list. We are going into the 4 Perona. We've seen a lot of lists just going back and forth on like 2 Perona, no Perona, 4 Perona. So this list does go with the full 4 for consistency. We have 3 Sentomaru. So we are actually leaning into the Sentomaru engine in this deck, which is actually the same way that my build goes that I have here on the channel. I like Sentomaru a lot. He is a really good like turn 3 and beyond play. Just for one card, you're pulling a card out of your deck, and you make that one of the strengths of the Dopey leader. Not only does the Dopey leader pull cards out of your deck to basically conserve your hand size, but you've also got Sentomaru doing the same thing, so you're not actually using cards from your hand to establish a board, you're just pulling cards out from your deck, which is going to make your hands kind of like artificially a lot bigger, alongside like Gecko Moria as well. Now for the boss lineup, we have 2 copies of Virgo, 2 Dopey, and 2 Mihawk. Now this is like the standard curve that you'll hear a lot of Dopey players say they want to go into, like 5 Dawn Virgo, 7 Dawn Dopey, and 9 Dawn Mihawk. But this is a rather low consistency variation of this curve, where you might not have the exact card you need on the correct Dawn turn, but that's kind of made okay by cards like Sentomaru, where let's say you have Virgo on 5 and you don't have Dopey on 7. Well, cool, you can just jam Sentomaru, use his effect, make a Pacifista from your deck, and then you can go into Mihawk the next turn if you have it. And then we're only playing 2 copies of Love Beam. We are not playing any Desert Spada, which is definitely one that seems like more of a staple in Dopey. And I just love Desert Spada's trigger, just like draw 2, pitch 1. That feels really nice to have. But obviously, can't deny how strong Love Beam is. But that's pretty much going to wrap it up for today's video, guys. We've gone over the deck lists here. I do have the link to all these deck lists down in the description, so make sure to check that out. Once again, huge shout out to PPG for all this information. Greatly appreciate it. And yeah, we're going to get into a lot more set 2 content as the weeks go by, but we'll still be covering the tournaments from set 1 as they appear. So make sure to stay tuned, subscribe if you're new. I'll see you guys in the next one.